Thank you, Yoshida-san. Cá nhân tôi cũng đặc biệt quan tâm đến cái vấn đề kế thừa. Chúng tôi có phân tích là các doanh nghiệp ở Việt Nam của cái thời đổi mới, nếu là sớm thì bắt đầu cuối năm 90, cuối năm 80, đầu năm 90. Và theo quan sát của chúng tôi đó, hầu như các công ty này là rất ít khi nghĩ tới cái quá trình thế hệ sau. Thì xin đặt một câu hỏi cho hội nghị là ở đây là chắc có nhiều người lãnh đạo doanh nghiệp á, thì những doanh nghiệp nào, những vị ở những doanh nghiệp nào mà có kế hoạch kế thừa, xin mời giơ tay lên. Xin mời giơ tay lên. Everyone who has a succession plan, please raise their hand. Chúng ta thấy rõ nha. Thấy rõ các anh các chị đó. Trong chúng ta rất nhiều người lãnh đạo các doanh nghiệp ở Việt Nam, thì số người mà có kế hoạch cụ thể đối với thế hệ sau là rất ít. Cái này chắc chắn sẽ là một cái động cơ lớn để thu hút sự quan tâm của các nhà đầu tư M&A. Neil, a key area is real estate that has in the past attracted interest. Can you share? So, is the interest here in land? Is the interest in projects? Is the interest in living accommodation? Is the interest in projects or participating with Vietnamese developers? Or is the interest in yield?
Thank you very much, Dominic. Well, I think to stick with some of the fundamentals that drive that, first of all, we've got this large population, 100 million people. But what we look at is the specifics of the demographics, a very young population, the rapidly growing middle class, and the demand that is creating across the different real estate sectors, but of course notably for housing, where there is certainly huge demand from foreign investors and developers looking to access good residential development projects. Given that the demand for housing that rapidly growing middle class is going to create. The Economist Intelligence Unit believe there's around 1 million middle class in Ho Chi Minh City today. They estimate that will grow to 5 million by 2030. And that's just talking about the middle class and the demand that's going to create for affordable housing. But then you can look at the affluent class, and the affluent class potentially doubling in number, and the demand that's going to create for mid-end and high-end housing as well. This young population are also driving a startup community, which is creating huge demand for office space. We're seeing the trend at the moment for shared office and a lack of space currently available in Ho Chi Minh City. That's helping to fill up office buildings to historically unique levels at 96%. And that comes to your question about yield, Dominic. We have some of the highest yields in the region. And for foreign investors who are hunting yield around Asia at the moment, you've got Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, all with yields of 2 to 3% if you're lucky. Whereas in Vietnam, prime office building, you may still be able to get 7 or 8%. And that's attracting huge interest for operating assets. We'll perhaps get on to the challenges in a minute, but the challenge for those foreign investors is finding those opportunities, and we'll perhaps go into that in a bit more detail.
Cảm ơn Nia đấy. Như vậy là sự quan tâm của các nhà đầu tư trong lĩnh vực bất động sản thì bắt đầu từ cái góc độ là xây dựng nhà ở cho người có thu nhập mà càng ngày càng cao hơn, rồi tới nhu cầu văn phòng, rồi cuối cùng và không kém sự quan tâm là những nhà đầu tư mà muốn tham gia mua nhà có một cái thu nhập, mua cao ốc, mua bất động sản có một cái thu nhập. Lee, you are of course an investor here. Woolworth Pincus has made a few investments here. Perhaps you can share with us where you're looking. What sectors are you looking at right now?
Sure. Before we look into sectors of Vietnam, we think well, this country is in a very interesting stage. I would call it a once-in-a-lifetime interesting stage because it's driven by 2 or 3 very important economic drivers. Number one is the emerging middle class, which has been growing very quickly in the past few years and also enabled the products and services that was not available 5 to 6 years ago. If you look at, for example, right, if you look at the cars today on the street in Ho Chi Minh City, it's my guess is a couple of times more than even 3 years ago. I still remember back in 2013 when I started to travel in Ho Chi Minh City. It took me 15 minutes from the airport to the hotel. Now I would consider 30 minutes to be lucky, but that is one of the proof that the consumption level has significantly risen, which supported new industries. And within that consumption growth, we actually sponsored a company called Vincom Retail together with Vingroup. Vincom Retail quickly developed, well, we invested in that company back in 2013. Within the span of 5 years, we quickly developed Vincom Retail into the country's largest shopping mall developer and operator. Today, it owns 40 to 50 shopping malls and a majority of the market, modern shopping mall market in Vietnam, and is still growing at a very rapid speed. So the second driver is, we could consider this as FDI growth. So FDI has been growing at a record speed in the past 3 years. And we've seen a lot of the manufacturers, a lot of this, I'll talk about we'll talk about real estate because it's one of our key focuses. So we have manufacturers, we have tenants really coming in the country looking for land, looking for workshops, looking for spaces to lease for manufacturing plants. And recently we've seen people coming also looking for e-commerce warehouses. So in that, we actually co-sponsored a company called BW Industrial Development, which is a joint venture with Beckham X to develop industrial real estate in the country with the hope to be able to provide the basic industrial infrastructure to the incoming tenants who would look to ramp up their manufacturing really quickly. So we would target to provide that one-stop service for those tenants to come before they started to roll up their operations. So the third driver, which is very interesting, is tourism, which is rarely seen in other countries when it started to develop. If you look at the history of the development in Korea, Japan, Taiwan, mainland China, all these countries, they had FDI drivers. They also had drivers in consumption, but very rarely you see that a country will get significantly benefited from their rich tourism resources. And in the past 2 years, we've started to see a very rapid growth in tourism arrivals, obviously partly driven by the growth of domestic airline industries, as well as the significantly improved airport infrastructure. And that has driven the hospitality industry to grow very quickly. And in that, we invested in a company called Lodges Hospitality, which acquire best-in-class hotels and grow domestic brands like Fusion, which is a domestic growing hospitality brand. So, yeah, lastly, I think just to conclude, well, before we conclude, we actually also invested in a very interesting company called Techcom Bank, a shareholder of Techcom Bank. Techcom Bank is obviously the largest privately owned bank, which actually benefits from almost all the three drivers that I just talked about. So just as a conclusion, we think Vietnam is at a key stage in its growth, and whoever could find a way to follow its key economic drivers will potentially have a success in investing in Vietnam.
Thank you. So we've been hearing from the buy side. Chúng ta mới nghe từ những nhà đầu tư quan tâm vào. Maybe we could hear a little bit from somebody who knows the sell side. Phong, you are obviously an advisor both to investors but also to companies that receive interest from M&A. Can you comment a little? What are the needs that you see in Vietnamese companies looking for M&A?
Sure. We actually do both sell side and buy side. So most of the case, I think when we actually work with the seller, I think most of the seller actually, in this case, Vietnamese. And going back to the observation that you actually make regarding the successful plan, I think that's absolutely kind of spot on. In most of the deal we actually work on, I think there's two kind of scenario. Either, because of they reach a certain age and there's no succession, they decided, to sell the business. And the other option is, whether or not their children actually have overseas education and then they actually move overseas as well. That, for the kind of sell side, in the case that, it's the majority divestment. But at the same time, we actually work with owners who actually want to partner with an investor, either a strategic investor or a financial investor, who want to, they expect someone actually to come in and help them to grow the business. Your observation regarding the slow in the growth of FMCG is actually correct. But within that FMCG, I think if you drill it down, I think into subsectors, you look into F&B, I think it's growing really fast. And in that environment, it used to be very easy to grow. I think it's automatic every year, 20, 30%. But now I think it's no longer the case. I think if you have the right technology, you need the right product development, that's the thing that you can actually get, I think, from certain kind of strategic investor who come in and help the business. And of course, I think it's about capital. I think, you need to invest, I think, for your plan. I think you need to invest, I think, for your working capital, new technology. I think all that costs money. So that kind of the requirement, I think, from the local kind of owner when actually, talking to an investor. In terms of going back to the first question that you asked in terms of sector-wise, I think consumers still kind of very strong. I think everyone actually coming in and, looking at 100 million people. Of course, I think it's not growing as fast as used to be, but there are certain kind of subsectors still growing really fast. And at the same time, it's not just consumer, but anything kind of consumer enabled. So we talk about kind of, logistics. We talk about kind of, the payment that actually support kind of, all the business. We talk about packaging, especially when it comes to F&B growth. I mean, those are actually the benefiting sector as well. And of course, I think on top, I think we expect that in the next year or so, there will be a lot of transaction, I think, in education, in healthcare. I think those are the sector will actually grow significantly in the next few years. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Phong. So we're hearing there from the seller's side, there is this help with succession. There is a need for partnership. And most often there is, of course, a need for capital. So we talked earlier about FDI, FII. Maybe we could ask both of our North Asian colleagues here, Madam Park and Yoshida-san, how do you see in your own countries the interest changing from FDI to strategic to FII investing? Perhaps we could start with Madam Park.
As I mentioned before, the reasons make investments into Vietnam has changed a lot. So the FDI of Vietnam is almost 30% of FDI in Vietnam is led by Korean companies. Korea is one of the biggest country in FDI amount in Vietnamese market, but the contribution ratio of M&A is still under expectation. It's just 5% of the cross-border M&A amount in Vietnam, but the amount and the transactions figures are getting increased very rapidly. Last year, the total amount of M&A from Korea to Vietnam is almost $300 billion. But only first half of this year is already $200 million from Korea to Vietnam. So to seek the expanding the market and also to reduce the cost, it needs to make alliance between Vietnamese and Korean companies. And also Korean small and medium-sized companies start to consider to make investment into Vietnamese market. They are some different from big companies. They need the local partners to support their business activities after acquiring the equity. So most of them want to remain the current management team after the M&A for the PMI, considering the PMI. So there is so many expectation to make alliance, strategic alliance and M&A to penetrate into Vietnamese market. And also there are many demands to be considered Vietnamese as a hub of Asia market. So after acquiring Vietnam company, many Korean companies is considering to expand neighborhood countries such as Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia. So Vietnamese partners is very important for Korean companies. So these kind of reasons, there are will be many alliance between two countries.
Thank you, thank you. So that's interesting. Historically, a small percentage of M&A and a large percentage of FDI, but the M&A percentage is growing, and Korean companies are looking for partnerships to expand into the region. This is one strength that Vietnamese companies have, is they offer partnership for the region. Yoshida-san, how about Japan?
In terms of FDI, from the statistics point of view, Korea was the #1 for 2015, 16, and 17. And for 2018, Japan was a little bigger than Korea, with the amount of $9 billion US dollar. And for this year, it seems that we are still ahead a little bit. And I guess that basically from the Japanese government policy point of view, I don't know how it is the Korean government policy, but Japanese government will certainly try to increase the FDI amount, especially into the infrastructure. And probably this will grow, and we will keep the same level of $9 billion to $10 billion US dollar this year for the FDI. As far as the M&A market is concerned, I guess that the number of transactions will increase because of the, as I said before, the small and mid companies will enter the Vietnamese market more and more, but the transaction amount itself will probably decrease because of lack of big players' investment. So probably the FDI will increase, and the amount of M&A the volume, the transaction size of the M&A transaction will decrease, but the number of M&A transactions will increase. That's my perspective. Thank you.
If I could ask, I think regarding the trend, I think it's very much, the way I look at that is sector rotation. So I think when it all started, manufacturing. So manufacturing and export, then, it's all started with FDI. But then I think when the investor actually get into the consumer market here, I think, to be able to address to that 100 million people and sell kind of product, right, you actually need the know-how, I think, of the local market. And one of the important know-how will actually be kind of the distribution. Because the distribution system in Vietnam is very challenging. I think you're looking at, it's dominated by general trade. I think modern trade account for just a small part of that. So for the investor actually to get into the market, to access to that 100 million people, you do need the distribution system. So you do need the local know-how. So with that, I think, we started with FDI. I think it's very challenging because, we'll probably, I think, take a few years, I think, and maybe it's very challenging to actually to build the same distribution system that an existing local company already have. So I think that one observation that I think why I think, we see kind of a slow shift, I think, from FDI to FII.
Thank you. So this is an evolution from maybe foreign investors looking to use Vietnam as a production base to export towards investors looking to invest in Vietnam because of Vietnamese consumers. And I think this is the trend that we're observing. So maybe we can understand the interest amongst foreign investors, amongst foreign M&A investors. Let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges. I think we have been asked to share what we find is difficult in the M&A environment. So perhaps we could start with you, Lee. What have you found difficult, if anything? Maybe nothing, huh? Maybe nothing is difficult.
Well, certainly difficulties, but fortunately we can conquer that. I think when we started to look into Vietnam, the professional network certainly was not as developed as today. A few years ago, if you want to figure out the legal framework, the tax frameworks, and you want to find a company to complete a due diligence at the same level as what we can find in other countries, obviously there are still companies there, but the number of those companies are definitely not as many as today. And today, if you look at Vietnam, it's a very developed, it's a fairly developed deal ecosystem. So for whoever want to invest in the country, I think one thing is they will find themselves not lacking of information or professional assistance in order to close the deal. So that actually greatly simplified the process for them, and it makes this country much easier to be able to attract foreign capital.
Thank you. So Lee here is saying there are no difficulties for him in investing in Vietnam. Congratulations. But let me ask Phong. You are an advisor. What typical difficulties do some of your clients have?
Sure. I think Lee actually looking at very big transaction. So I think in those cases, normally, I think, the targets, everything is ready. I think, the team kind of understand the M&A, environment, the M&A process. For us, I think because we actually work with, various deal size. I think, smaller could be even $5 million transaction, I think up to kind of $1 billion. So we actually exposed to a wide range of investor and a wide range of, owner as well. And the challenge, I think, Warwick already kind of presented on the board. I think it's very clear. The top two challenges that we have faced is the first one is actually valuation. So valuation has always been kind of challenging because the owner actually, look at similar kind of transaction where, they're not kind of sufficient information regarding, in terms of that, the valuation, but, what are the terms and conditions actually associated with that valuation. So that information is missing. What is available is only the valuation. So, when we actually get into a deal, talk to the investor, asking a very sizable kind of, very fat valuation, then it's very difficult. That's the first challenge. And then after that, I think we kind of okay with the valuation in terms of, what would be kind of the multiple, what would make sense in the market, what is comparable with the region. The next one actually on the quality of information. The quality of information comes from two things, because there are different set of books, because there's no proper kind of management account. And the third reason is maybe the owner actually doesn't trust to share the information, I think, with the investor. I think, that's the business. Why would we actually need to share a lot of information to the investor? So that probably, I think, the two kind of top challenges for the investor actually to come in.
Okay, thank you. So valuation. My own observation is that when we meet Vietnamese companies, the first thing we hear is a very high valuation. But also, when we meet foreign investors, we hear foreign investors always want a very low valuation. And I think maybe both are wrong. In the history of M&A transactions, normally the valuation is the last thing that is agreed. The first, I think, is, as Phong is saying, is the quality of information, the understanding, the partnership, the removal of risks. And once we've discussed that, then only then do we talk about valuation. But valuation has come up, so please, panel, who has a view on valuation that they would like to share with us, please?
I think the removal of risk, Dominic, is key to that. And if you can remove that risk, then at that point, you can start to talk about higher valuations. And there are certainly those in the market now who will pay a premium for real estate deals where that risk has been minimized. And very interesting to look at the KPMG statistics. Only 2 out of 5 deals actually completing. And part of that is the length of time transactions take, and real estate's a very good indicator of this. Transactions can take such a long time in Vietnam, and that leaves so much more time for a deal to fall over. So perhaps the opportunity for everyone in the room is to minimize that risk early on and put that preparation in before entering into any discussions. And if a deal can be de-risked before going to market, A, it will happen quicker, and B, you probably will get that higher valuation in the process.
So Yoshida-san and Madam Park and Lee, do you have views on valuations to share with us, please?
I think valuation is it's demand and supply driven, obviously. There were periods we see in Vietnam in the past years that valuation was low on a relative basis, and there were also periods which could trace back to in the past 1 to 2 years, even in recent deals, that valuation is not as low as before. But I think the valuation is a relative term to us. I think the important thing for us to typically, when we evaluate a company or even evaluate a property, to think about is the potential of a company or of an asset, the operations, well, the strengths of the operations. Well, it obviously have a lot, people would have different views on that. But I think one important thing that we've learned in the market is just to stick to whatever you're good at. If you can really just, you have a belief in the business that you're going to invest in through an M&A activity, there is a higher likelihood that you will be able to succeed. Because in a lot times, I think valuation is external. As investors, sometimes we don't get to decide the valuation. Competition decides the valuation. So that's our experience.
Thank you. So Neil is talking about the need to reduce risk factors in a transaction, because the lower the perceived risk, the higher the valuation. And Lee is talking about the need to see the potential. So the higher the potential, the higher the valuation. Two factors affecting valuation. Absolutely, yes. No comments from our Japanese or Korean colleagues on the subject of valuation?
As far as the valuation is concerned, I think what Lee said is maybe a little far from the possibility of Japanese companies understanding. And probably what Neil said is closer to Japanese mind, maybe, is my perspective. But I fully agree with Dominic that both parties are wrong. Basically, the valuation suggested from the Vietnamese side looks too high, and the expected valuation from the Japan side is too low. So we have to find a nice middle for that, and this is probably our job. Thank you.
One problem that I have observed in M&A is it's not the arrival, it's not the meeting, it's not the investment, it's not the beginning, but it is the end of the investment. What happens after an investment is made, and how do we agree about that? For example, Lee, you are a financial investor. You will make an investment, but when you make an investment, you will always want to know how you get your money back. Can you talk a little bit about that, the exit mentality?
Yes, I'll probably just keep it a little bit more general. I think the domestic capital market is typically something we really look into when evaluating between different companies. I think so far, Vietnam, I've seen very good comments today that the securities laws will be improved, the processes will be greatly shortened. I think these are all very good trends to have. Certainly the market itself, especially the public capital market, is not as developed as more developed regions like Singapore or Hong Kong, which has much bigger stock markets. But we've seen a lot interest, even from overseas, into Vietnam. For example, we successfully listed, well, with our co-sponsor Vingroup, we successfully listed a Vincom Retail last year in Vietnam Stock Exchange. And to our surprise, a very significant portion of the demand in the listing space actually came from overseas investor. And we learned through that process that a lot of investors actually were sidelined. They look into the listing space in Vietnam. They like companies in Vietnam. They want to be able to take on the ride of the country's economic growth. But sometimes they just don't know how to invest in the country. So I think in that we see very good improvements, and we see continued development of the local capital markets, which we have a lot of hope on. I think, again, as a conclusion, I think it is early, but it is unique, because if you look at the other capital markets like Hong Kong or Singapore, there are a fair amount of companies, but very few companies would carry the characteristics of a Vietnamese company in the listing space, carry the growth potential, the market potential, and also the further execution potential overall going forward.
Thank you, Lee. So the point there, the strength, the importance of strong capital markets, especially for financial investors who need to have an exit. And maybe Phong, you could comment here. What is your experience of organizing, negotiating exits for investors in companies?
Is that regarding kind of the deal process, or?
Your experience in negotiating with Vietnamese companies, how an exit can be achieved for an investor?
Okay. So far, I think, probably I think Robert actually did a very successful, exit. And we're looking at kind of private equity when they actually started, I think, get back to the country. I think 2013 and 14, especially kind of the mid-tier private equities. So they already, make the investment at that time. Normally, the investment horizon will be 5 to 7 years. So now I think it's actually kind of the time for certain private equity to start, to do the exit. And so far, I think with the attractiveness, I think, of the market, and at the same time, I think when the private equity coming in, they already build a very good reporting system. I think, all the information is there, very strong management. So the process, I think, in those cases, actually quite straightforward. Yeah. So normally, I think we would not have kind of any, significant difficulties, except for the valuation. I think in terms of, how to run the process and, negotiate with an incoming investor. And normally, I think the incoming investor will actually be through a trade sales. So it's a strategic investor actually coming in. Yeah. Sometimes I think we're actually looking at the local player as well. I think the big group, Vingroup, Masan, I think the big players, and they are very much in it for those transactions.
Yeah, I want to come back to the local investors, but maybe we talk about strategic investors. I think perhaps from Japan, from Korea, we see more strategic interest. These is it fair to say these are investors who do not plan to exit, who are looking for investment forever? Yoshida-san, Madam Park.
Can I go ahead? Thank you, Dominic. Basically, the general trend is strategic, so no exit. This is the basic trend. But we are starting to see several financial investors as well from Japan these days. And another thing is that there is an increase of number of transactions in the real estate. So in the real estate sector, although the Japanese investor is strategic, it may be that they are also thinking about exiting. Because of the land price going so much up, they are originally strategic, but they become half strategic or financial. I think that's the situation.
Yes.
Just to expand on that a little bit, what we saw with Japanese investors early on was as they explored the market and got comfortable with the market, they were taking minority positions, both in developers themselves and at the project level. But as they've gained in confidence and got more comfortable with the market, they're starting to look to majority or even 100% ownership, certainly at the project level.
But of course, in real estate, a lot of investments are self-liquidating, right? So you make your investment
certainly on the residential
through the development of a project, you get your exit, yeah?
Yeah. The trick is to avoid trapped cash at that point. But so with the residentials, that will be self-fulfilling. I think with commercial investments now, the liquidity is better than it ever has been. The strength of demand and the ability to exit at a significantly lower cap rate than you'd entered is better than it ever has been. So that liquidity aspect is there. Perhaps the missing piece of the puzzle with real estate is whether the government can make big strides with the real estate investment trust route and the securitization of real estate, which would be very interesting, and perhaps the market is ready to start looking at that. But
so the idea here, again, capital markets, real estate investment trusts. Quỹ đầu tư bất động sản. Yes, an area of interest. I want to talk about local dynamics, and maybe Phong, you can lead that. But nhưng đây là một cơ hội, các anh các chị là ai mà muốn có câu hỏi gì cho nhóm trên panel này thì mong các anh các chị chuẩn bị câu hỏi. So Phong, sorry, I just wanted to ask the panel, the audience, that they should feel free to ask questions for any of the panel. But let's talk a little bit about domestic M&A. So Vingroup, there's been a lot in the banking sector, a lot of banks buying back their foreign shareholders. We remember 10 years ago how a lot of us were concerned that foreign banks would be buying all of the Vietnamese joint stock banks. What we have found now, of course, is that Vietnamese banks have been buying back all of the foreign shares from OCBC, from UOB, from HSBC, from Standard Chartered, from BNP, etc. So the banks, so Vingroup, so Masan, we saw recently FPT making a big investment in the US. Phong, tell us a little, what are you seeing Vietnamese companies active as buyers in M&A?
I think it's more kind of a change, I think, in the mindset, right? I mean, when it all started, I think the company will actually think that, we are a Vietnamese company. I think, this is our market. We definitely can build. I think especially, in Vietnam, no one will actually be better than us. We know the people, we have the team. As long as we bring the team in, we have capital, we can do it. But it has been kind of proven that, that sort of process, I think, building from scratch actually take a bit of time. And at the same time, you actually have foreign investor, I think, coming in. And of course, I think the deal process, I think, will take a year. But, after that year, they can actually easily come in, they secure the market, which, supposed to actually be for the player who really understand kind of the market. The line of, the big group, Vingroup, Masan, and, some kind of other private groups. So now I think the strategy, some of the group, they actually changed their strategy. So to grow the market, the fastest way, they're going to actually do it through M&A. And we've been kind of helping, some big Vietnamese, I think, company, I think, in their kind of, M&A process, I think, engaged, they're very professional, engaged, I think, with the advisory process, I think, engaged with the due diligence process. Because that would simply kind of the fastest way to expand the market, and especially for the conglomerate, I think they just don't do in one sector, right? They focus on a lot of sectors, and they understand, I think, to start from scratch, I think in one sector, it takes too much time. So that's why rather than, doing the whole thing, willing to pay, I think, take over the company, which means that you take over the sectors. And when they do that, they have the advantage because, let's say a foreign investor coming in, would be quite challenging to, get used to, especially for small company, private company, to set up books, tax here and there. But a local company, I think they would be easier for a local investor to actually to structure the deal. So they can easily translate that into an asset deal or, just take over a certain part of the business and just leave the risk aside. And at the same time, owner to owner, Vietnamese to Vietnamese is a very easy conversation, I think, rather than you actually have, a lot of people, I think, in the room. So in Vietnam, I think still, you talk to the owner, still a handshake actually would do. Yeah.
So growing interest from local investors. Lee, you talked about competition earlier. Are you seeing competition from Vietnamese M&A players?
Certainly. I think as the economy continues to grow, I think we've seen several fairly big companies growing even bigger. And in that, especially in real estate, we encounter a lot of the cases that whatever properties we look at, there will always be at least one or two very strong, large local sponsors competing with us. So I think that's actually, in the long, obviously in the short term, is a pain for the buyer, but in the mid to long term, that's very necessary for the local market to eventually mature. Because today's strong buyers or strong competitors, tomorrow can be your takeout option, especially in real estate.
Thank you. So Neil, on the subject of real estate, do you think that foreign investors can compete effectively, or is this a market where local investors have the strong hand?
So there's no doubt historically that the big local developers have been able to access land bank that was perhaps somewhat off limits for foreign investors. So they've been able to take over projects at a much earlier stage or enter into sale and purchase agreements at a much earlier stage with CPs in place. That was definitely historically the case. What we're seeing now is pressure on those local developers to continue to grow their land banks, to keep up the momentum that they've had in place. And it's going to be interesting to see just how early they get involved in some of the transactions and how much conversion risks they might take on. We're also seeing some of the bigger local developers start to exit to foreign developers. So Ving Group in Hanoi exiting a big commercial development to CapitaLand, for example. So we're seeing it come in that direction as well. So I think historically, definitely, local developers able to access land bank that was off limits to foreigners, and until cleaner land bank comes through, it's difficult for the foreign investors to compete.
Do we have any questions from the floor at all? Có ai trong chúng ta là các anh các chị là có đặt câu hỏi cho các vị ở trên panel không? No questions. Okay, so we're coming to an end. So my last question, very quickly for everybody, is as we look to the future, what is the biggest risk to the M&A environment here? And let's start with you, Lee. And
that's a good question. I would say the biggest risk, right? I despite that I have this very positive view, I would say the biggest risk is still pricing. That's, as an investor, that's our biggest experience across different markets too. If you get the price right, then you have a relatively easier life, because after you make the investment, you actually will own a piece of asset or a piece of a company. You would grow with them together with the right entry. That makes your life much easier. And in today's Vietnam, the positive part is obviously there are a lot of interest domestically and from overseas investors. And in that environment, again, I think that the biggest experience that we've learned to date is we only stick, or whoever investing in this country, well, the suggestion is they only stick to the things that they know the best.
so thank you. Valuation. Madam Park, would you say the biggest risk to the M&A environment?
Vietnamese market, on the Vietnamese market, every countries over the world looking at. So there are so many competitions, and so I can understand why the expectation of valuation is so high. So I thought, as the strategic investors' view, after acquiring, post-merger integration is the most important thing. So even though there are competitions between financial investors and strategic investors and local and foreign investors, but foreign investors over strategic investors, the most advantages is making a different view to make a synergy effect. So after acquiring, to execution the plan is the most and challenging thing.
Execution of plan, thank you. Yoshida-san.
I think, when we talk about risk, we have to talk about the risk for the Vietnamese M&A market as well as the Japanese investors. So for the Japanese investors, I think the risk is that the real estate market will collapse. It's going too much up and it's heated too much. And for the Vietnamese M&A market, it may be a common risk for every country in the region. And it should be the international, constraint, and that may be affect, especially conservative Japanese investment to the country.
Thank you, Yoshida-san, and Neil.
So sticking with M&A risk and not the future of the real estate market in general for the moment. Look, right now, Vietnam's very much in the spotlight. There's huge investor interest in Vietnam. But I think the biggest risk is the lack of ability for those foreign investors to access deals. And if somebody else steps into that spotlight, into the limelight, and offers an easier route for these investors to deploy capital, then we will see those investors move on. And I think that's perhaps the biggest risk right now in the certainly the foreign real estate M&A environment.
So pipeline, thank you. And Phong, last word from you.
Sure, I think regarding the M&A, I agree that, it's going to be kind of valuation, it's going to be kind of, the process, going to be kind of transparency of those. But for me, I mean, it's not really a risk, but the important factor that I'm actually will look closely into will actually be the consumer confidence. That's why we actually have, 100 million people. We need, the people actually to be confident, to spend, to consume, and to drive the economy. And, all that macro factor will help drive, all these kind of M&A activities. For me, I mean, that would be something that I would watch out for. Yeah.
Interesting. So the macroeconomic environment, stability, confidence. Thank you all very much indeed.
Hello. Sorry. Hi, Dominic, down here.
Where? Please.
Just have a very quick comments before you close the floor. It's just it's more like a sharing because we're talking about risk of M&As and potential area that need to pay attention on. What I observe, and I think if any of those experts up there can share, there's a threat which is about the M&A, which is about acquisition of the strategic asset. We can be exposed to national security in terms of energy, in terms of strategic resources, in terms of strategic industry. Those are the area that I think the regulations, the law in Vietnam still don't have any particular regulation, which is necessary to control that, because there's the law on merger control, merger management, but there's nothing in particular about what kind of target, what kind of asset that should be kept an eye on, that should be controlled. And it is not something, this is not xenophobia kind of mentality. It is the fact of the work today. If you look at the US, if you go to Canada, Australia, any other country, there would always be certain part of the economy, certain part of the business activity that is controlled, that is managed by the government in order to ensure the long-term benefit, the long-term strategic advantages of that particular country. So that is the area I think contain a certain level of risk, not huge but significant, and it's growing more. That is the area I think should be paid more attention on, as a matter of fact.
Thank you, Tuan. So there is a point about the environment of protectionism that we see globally these days. You mentioned the US, other countries, and the need to clearly define what is in the national interests. Thank you, Tuan. On that note, and on time, I'd like to call an end to this panel. Cảm ơn ông Lee, cảm ơn bà Park, cảm ơn ông Shida, cảm ơn ông Neil, cảm ơn ông Phong. Cảm ơn tất cả các quý vị đã lắng nghe phiên này kết thúc. Cảm ơn.
Ban tổ chức xin trân trọng cảm ơn phần điều phối của ông Dominic cũng như các chia sẻ của tất cả các vị diễn giả đã tham gia chủ đề thứ hai của chúng tôi. Và ngay sau đây chúng ta sẽ đến với một chủ đề với những chia sẻ từ chính những người trong cuộc, những người tạo lập thương vụ, những thất bại, những thành công của họ trong hoạt động M&A là gì. Ngay sau đây chúng ta sẽ đến với phiên thứ 3 về chiến lược M&A để tạo tăng trưởng đột phá. Chúng tôi xin được trân trọng giới thiệu lên sân khấu để tham gia với chúng tôi trong phiên thứ 3. Tiến sĩ Yong Suk Jo, nguyên Bộ trưởng Bộ Doanh nghiệp Hàn Quốc sẽ cung cấp cho chúng ta những thông tin từ bên ngoài. Xin được kính mời ông Lê Thành Trung, Phó Tổng Giám đốc Ngân hàng HD Bank. Xin được kính mời bà Nguyễn Thị Trà My, Phó Chủ tịch kiêm Tổng Giám đốc Tập đoàn Pan. Chúng tôi cũng xin được kính mời ông Rick Machi, đại diện Liên minh mua bán sáp nhập doanh nghiệp toàn cầu, Tổng Giám đốc của Laret Lerano Private Capital. Xin được kính mời bà Renny Kha, Giám đốc điều hành công ty Việt Values. Và để điều phối cho phiên thứ 3 của chúng tôi, xin trân trọng kính mời lên sân khấu ông Nguyễn Công Ái, Phó Tổng Giám đốc KPMG Việt Nam. Một lần nữa xin trân trọng kính mời các vị diễn giả có tên và tiến sĩ Nguyễn Công Ái. Chúng ta cùng bắt đầu phiên thứ 3. Xin mời quý vị đi theo lối chính giữa. Xin cảm ơn.
Xin chào tất cả các quý vị. Tôi thường có một cái vinh dự do tạp báo đầu tư cho tôi được hưởng nhiều năm. Tức là luôn luôn dẫn cái chương trình cuối cùng của hội thảo. Lúc mà mọi người rất là mệt mỏi rồi. Và có lẽ trên khuôn mặt của quý vị tôi thấy cũng có nhiều biểu hiện của sự mệt mỏi. Cho nên tôi xin phép được yêu cầu các cái diễn giả trong panel của tôi sẽ có tuân thủ một số các cái nguyên tắc để giúp quý vị đỡ mệt mỏi hơn một chút. Tức là tôi đề nghị là thưa quý vị đây là nếu mà quý vị có thể mà cứ 3 câu nói thì là thêm một câu đùa được không ạ? Đấy. Và thứ hai nữa là tôi đề nghị là nếu như là tôi hỏi thì tôi xin phép chỉ được hỏi trong vòng tối đa là nửa phút. Còn quý vị thì trả lời trong vòng 3 phút được không ạ? Dạ, như vậy thì để chúng ta có thể là làm thế nào để cho các cái hội trường của chúng ta đỡ buồn ngủ. Và như vậy cũng sẽ tăng thêm cái sự hấp dẫn của cái cuộc trao đổi của chúng ta. Nếu mà quý vị đồng ý thì đề nghị tất cả các quý vị cho một tràng vỗ tay ạ. Thank you very much. Như vậy trước khi chúng ta bắt đầu cái phần trao đổi thì xin phép quý vị cho tôi được tự giới thiệu. Và sau đó thì các diễn giả cũng sẽ tự giới thiệu về mình. Chúng ta sẽ giữ cái phần giới thiệu này dưới 1 phút cho mỗi người được không ạ? Cảm ơn tất cả các quý vị. Tôi tên là Nguyễn Công Ái, hiện nay tôi là Phó Tổng Giám đốc của KPMG Việt Nam, phụ trách văn phòng Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, đồng thời cũng phụ trách cái mảng tư vấn chiến lược. Và tôi thì đã làm việc cho KPMG đến nay được 20 năm. Xin hết tại đây và xin các quý vị được tự giới thiệu, bắt đầu từ chị Rini ạ.
Hello everyone, my name is Renee Kha. I'm from Việt Values. We have been advising real estate company developers in regard to post M&A transactions. So our focus on regard to the issues with the dealings is that we advise all the issue related to land use right. So hopefully and I can lead us to my reply and my response regard to land use right matters in Vietnam. Thank you.
I'll use this one. My name is Rick Marchese. I'm American. I'm in Singapore. The rest of my personal information is in the program. But I'm here representing the Alliance of M&A Advisors. It's a U.S. organization that promotes professionalism in the lower middle market M&A sector. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Xin kính chào các vị. Tôi là Trà My. Chắc là thông tin chắc là các vị cũng được xem trong cuốn đã gửi cho các bạn rồi. Thế còn tôi muốn khoe về Pan thôi ạ. Pan là công ty PAN là một tập đoàn Việt Nam hoạt động trong lĩnh vực nông nghiệp và thực phẩm. Hiện nay thì PAN chúng tôi đã sở hữu những cái công ty hàng đầu Việt Nam trong hai lĩnh vực này. Và PAN Group là một câu chuyện rất là hay về M&A. Không biết có chủ quan hay không, nhưng mà bản thân tôi và những thành viên trong tập đoàn thì nghĩ vậy. Bởi vì cái câu chuyện về PAN là một câu chuyện mà chúng tôi hay nói đùa với nhau là đó là một câu chuyện của gọi là sinh con rồi mới sinh cha, sinh cháu giữ nhà rồi mới sinh ông. Mặc dù tuổi đời của PAN Group mới có 7 năm thôi, nhưng mà chúng tôi đang sở hữu những công ty có đến tới 20, 30 và thậm chí có những công ty tới hơn nửa thế kỷ. Xin hết ạ.
Chắc xin chào tất cả quý vị. Tôi thì chắc hơi ngược lại với chị Trà My một tí, khoe mình trước, khoe HD Bank chắc để chút nữa sẽ khoe ạ. Dạ. Thì tôi làm trong ngành ngân hàng thì cũng đâu đó cũng khoảng độ trên 25 năm rồi. Bắt đầu từ một nhân viên thanh toán, tín dụng, thậm chí có một thời kỳ làm ngân quỹ nữa cả. Đấy. Tốt nghiệp và học đến tiến sĩ ở Nga và cũng làm việc bên Nga cũng đâu đó cũng khoảng 17 năm. Thế thì trước thì tôi làm Vietcombank, làm trưởng đại diện của Vietcombank tại Liên bang Nga và Đông Âu. Sau đó thì về làm chánh văn phòng ngân hàng ngoại thương. Đấy, làm phó tổng giám đốc kiêm giám đốc cái Vietcombank Leasing, rồi hội đồng quản trị, phó tổng thường trực của Sinan Vina. Và vừa rồi thì cũng cách đây ít năm thì tôi về làm ở HD Bank. Thì làm ở mấy cái lĩnh vực mà nó đúng như là cái hội nghị của chúng ta. Thứ nhất là tất cả cái chương trình về tái cấu trúc hệ thống, xử lý nợ xấu và thêm một phần về truyền thông nữa. Thế thì đấy là những cái gì mà tôi đang làm. Thì tí nữa anh Ái và các vị có thể đặt câu hỏi. Xin cảm ơn.